The night my sister crushed my ring under her heel, she laughed and called it market trash. But 2 days later, she went so pale she couldn't even speak. How does one small stomp turn into a complete collapse? My name is Anita. I'm 32, and I work quietly behind the scenes as a private archival specialist. The kind of person people rarely notice until something valuable goes missing. I've spent my life preserving fragile things, old paper, rare manuscripts, family history, because I know how easily something priceless can be destroyed by careless hands. And for 10 long years, I thought I was preserving my family too. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened that night, in California, how one party turned into public humiliation, how a single piece of jewelry became the line between being a sister and being a servant, and why I walked out without saying a word, even though my hand was bleeding. It was supposed to be a simple evening, a celebration. Gloria's milestone birthday, her excuse to rent an expensive seaside villa and gather the kind of crowd that measures human worth by brand labels and who gets invited to the next event. The villa smelled like designer perfume and citrus candles. Strings of warm lights glowed along the patio. Inside, laughter bounced off marble counters, and the ocean outside was dark and calm, like it hadn't been told it needed to perform. I arrived alone, on time, wearing a clean black dress, and my usual careful expression polite, quiet, invisible. That had always been my role in Gloria's world. I didn't come to compete. I didn't come to shine. I came because she was my sister, and because for years I had trained myself to believe that showing up was the same thing as belonging. The ring was on my finger the way it always was. A deep black sapphire set into platinum. Subtle, not flashy, but striking in the right light. I never wore it to impress anyone. I wore it because it reminded me of something I almost forgot. Dignity can survive even when people try to grind it down. For the first 30 minutes, things were normal. Gloria was in her element, laughing too loud, kissing cheeks, floating from group to group like a queen making her rounds. Todd, her husband, stayed near the open bar with that smug ease he always had, as if the world owed him comfort for simply existing. Guests chatted about real estate, private schools, luxury cars, vacations they pretended were spontaneous. I stayed near the edge of the room, sipping sparkling water, smiling when someone looked at me. That was the safest way to be. Blend in, don't trigger, don't invite attention. And then attention found me anyway. A woman in an elegant cream dress, someone I'd never met, stepped closer and gently took my hand as she complimented my nails. Her gaze fell to my ring, and her face changed instantly, like she'd just seen something that didn't belong in an ordinary conversation. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Is that a 19th century black sapphire? Because the brilliance is breathtaking. This can't be modern. This has to be worth a small fortune." It wasn't even loud. It wasn't meant to cause a scene. It was a simple moment of admiration, a stranger noticing something beautiful, something meaningful. But Gloria heard it. I felt it before I saw her, the shift in the air, the slight pause in nearby voices. Then I saw Gloria's head turn sharply across the room. Her smile froze, her eyes narrowed. And the next thing I knew, she was walking toward me with that polished party host grace, and something darker underneath. She slid in too close. "What is this?" she asked softly, still smiling for the crowd, but her fingers closed around my wrist with a grip that wasn't affectionate. "It's just," I started, trying to keep my voice calm. Gloria leaned in, her perfume sharp in my nose. "Don't," she warned, her words gentle but her tone like a blade. "Don't embarrass me." I blinked. "Embarrass you?" She glanced at the woman who had complimented me, then back at my ring as if it had personally insulted her. "Market trash," she said, louder now, with a laugh that carried. "Honestly, where do you even find something like that?" My stomach dropped. I could feel the familiar pressure rise in my chest, the instinct to apologize for existing, the instinct to shrink, so she wouldn't get worse. I'd done that for years. I'd swallowed insults at family dinners. I'd ignored the way she joked about my work. I'd pretended not to notice Todd's smirks, his comments about me being lucky to have a quiet life. But this was different. This was public. The elegant guest looked uncomfortable, unsure whether she'd accidentally started drama. I opened my mouth to correct Gloria, to say the ring was real, that it wasn't something cheap, that it mattered. Gloria didn't let me. She lunged for my hand. Her nails scraped my skin as she tried to pull the ring off. I jerked back instinctively, more startled than angry. Gloria, stop please. That word please was gasoline. It always made her feel powerful. Look at her, Gloria said, turning it into theater. Her voice rose and sliced through the room. She brings fake antiques to my party like she's some secret heiress. It's pathetic. Heads turned. Conversations died. People who had been laughing a moment ago suddenly watched with cautious interest, the way humans watch a storm approaching someone else's house. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the old fear of being trapped again inside Gloria's narrative, where I was always the embarrassing one, the needy one, the one who should be grateful. I tried again, quieter. It's mine. Please, just give it back. Gloria's expression sharpened, like she'd heard a challenge. She yanked the ring free with a brutal twist that made my knuckles sting. Then she held it up between two fingers like it was dirty. Get this trash out of my sight, she announced, before it ruins the atmosphere. And then, before I could even breathe properly, she tossed it onto the ceramic tile. The ring hit the floor with a tiny clink. Just a clink. Nothing dramatic. But my body reacted like it had heard a gunshot. I stepped forward. Gloria stepped forward faster. She lifted her foot, her stiletto poised, and for a split second, I thought she was bluffing, just a threat, just another cruelty meant to make me flinch. She wasn't bluffing. She brought her heel down hard. The sickening sound of vintage platinum snapping under a sharp heel is much quieter than you might imagine. It was a small, cruel sound, like a promise being broken in private, except it happened in front of everyone. Gloria didn't stop at one stomp. She ground the ring into the tile, twisting slightly, putting her full weight into it until the setting collapsed and the safety chain finally surrendered. When she looked up, her smile was triumphant, like she'd proven she could destroy anything associated with me. For a moment, nobody spoke. And then Todd laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. A full, mocking laugh from the open bar. He stepped forward with a drink in his hand, wrapped an arm around Gloria's waist like she'd done something impressive, and raised his voice so the room would hear him. She's right, he said, looking down at me with disdain. You should know better than to bring cheap accessories to a gathering like this. It's embarrassing. That comment, so casual, so cruel, gave the guests permission to relax. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, soft at first, then louder, because everyone wanted to be on the host's side. No one wants to be the person defending the woman kneeling on the floor. I forced myself to breathe. Then I lowered my knees to the tile and began gathering the remains. Black sapphire fragments, scattered like broken stars. The platinum band was twisted into an unrecognizable shape. As I picked up the jagged pieces, the metal sliced into my palm. A thin line of blood appeared, bright against the dark stone. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize. Because something inside me, something old and tired, finally went quiet. I rose slowly with the broken ring clenched in my bleeding hand. Gloria stared at me with a challenge in her eyes, waiting for my usual reaction. Todd swirled ice in his glass, bored now that the show had peaked. They expected me to defend myself. They expected me to explain that the ring wasn't trash. They expected me to do what I always did, fix the moment, absorb the humiliation, preserve the illusion of family. But I didn't. I looked at them once, not with anger, not even with sadness, just with the emptiness of a person who has finally understood the truth. Then I turned and walked toward the heavy oak front door. Behind me, the party noise tried to restart forced laughter, shallow conversation like the room was desperate to pretend nothing had happened. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing that world inside. And as the cool night air hit my face, I realized something that made my steps steady for the first time in years. Gloria thought she had crushed a cheap ring. What she actually crushed was the last reason I had to keep protecting her. And she had no idea what that was going to cost her. Not yet. The coastal highway stretched out in front of me like a dark ribbon, smooth and indifferent. While inside my car, everything felt too loud, my heartbeat, my breathing, the quiet rattle of broken metal on the passenger seat every time I changed lanes. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing at what used to be my ring. Under the dashboard glow, the black sapphire fragments looked like tiny pieces of night, scattered and helpless, and the platinum band, once elegant and unbending, was twisted into something that didn't even resemble a circle anymore. My palm throbbed where the jagged edge had cut me. The blood had dried into a thin, sticky line across the crease of my hand, and it stung whenever I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. But the physical pain was distant, almost irrelevant. What hurt was the way the room had laughed after Gloria crushed it, the way Todd's voice had turned me into entertainment, the way strangers had chosen comfort over truth with a few easy chuckles. I told myself I shouldn't be surprised. I told myself I'd seen this before, in smaller ways, for years. But the ring had been something different. It wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that someone, once, had looked at me and seen value, real value, when my own family looked right through me like I was glass. A cold wind came through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of salt from the ocean. I let it hit my face because it felt clean, like it belonged to a life that wasn't poisoned by family expectations. The city lights blurred behind me. Ahead, the road was empty. And in that emptiness, memories that I had been forcing down for years began to rise. Mrs. Harrison's library had always been quiet in a way that felt sacred. The first time I walked into her home, I remember thinking it looked like time had decided to live there. Antique lamps threw warm circles of light onto shelves lined with first editions and handwritten letters, and everything smelled like polished wood, old paper, and patience. Mrs. Harrison herself was small, reclusive, and sharp-eyed. She spoke slowly, like every word was something she had weighed first. I wasn't important to her at the beginning. I was hired help, a young woman with careful hands and a resume that proved I was reliable. But over time, she began to watch me differently. Not like an employer watching an employee, but like someone testing whether I would treat fragile things with respect, whether I understood that true worth was usually quiet. I did. I always had. Maybe that's why, when her health began to fail, she didn't want loud visitors or dramatic goodbyes. She wanted the person who could sit in silence without needing to fill it. She wanted me. Near the end, on a late afternoon when the sunlight was fading and the whole house looked like it was holding its breath, she called me into her study. She was wrapped in a shawl, her hands thin but steady. On the desk beside her sat a small velvet box, the kind that looked too ordinary to hold anything life-changing. "Anita," she said softly, and even hearing my name in her voice had always felt different, like it belonged to someone stronger than the girl my family kept trying to reduce me into. "Come closer." I did. She opened the box, and inside was the ring-black sapphire, deep as a secret, framed in platinum that looked like it had been designed to survive centuries. I remember staring at it, too stunned to speak. "This ring has survived wars," she told me. "It has survived hands that didn't deserve it. People break things because they don't understand them, or because they're threatened by what they can't control." I looked up at her, confused. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm leaving," she said simply, and my throat tightened. "And I've watched you for years. You carry burdens as if they're your duty. You apologize for taking up space. But you have something most people don't: restraint, integrity, the ability to preserve what matters." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to being seen like that. I wasn't used to praise that didn't come with a hook attached. She closed my fingers around the box. "This was never meant to be a trophy," she said. "It's a reminder. Dignity can outlast cruelty. And when someone tries to grind you down, you remember survival is a kind of victory." That was what Gloria had stomped on. Not just a ring, a message, a promise, a piece of the only person who had ever made me feel like my existence had weight. The memory hit me so hard that I had to pull into a quiet overlook above the cliffs. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there in the dark with the ocean roaring below like an endless warning. For a long moment, I just stared at the broken pieces on the passenger seat, and the grief finally rose into my throat like a wave. But it wasn't the kind of grief that begged for comfort. It was the kind that transforms. Because as I stared, another truth settled in, one I had been avoiding with excuses and hope for far too long. Gloria and Todd didn't destroy my ring by accident. They destroyed it because they could, because they were used to me taking it. Used to me being the person who absorbed humiliation and still showed up the next day with a polite smile and another, "It's okay." And why were they so comfortable doing that? Because I had spent a decade cushioning their lives. Quietly, efficiently, like it was normal. For years, I told myself I was doing it for family. I convinced myself that my support was temporary, that it would help them get stable, that once the stress was gone, they would soften, that Gloria would remember I was her sister, that Todd would stop mocking me once he realized I was the reason their life looked so shiny from the outside. I was wrong. My support didn't make them kinder. It made them bolder. It trained them to believe that consequences were optional, that someone else would always clean up the mess. I swallowed hard and wiped my palm with a tissue from the glove compartment, smearing old blood across paper. My hand trembled, not because I was weak, but because I was finally allowing myself to see the full shape of the trap I'd been living in. When I was younger, my family loved to tell a story about me. They told everyone I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need much. It sounded like praise, but it was really a label, one that made it easy to give me less and expect more. Gloria was the sparkling center of attention, the one who deserved beautiful things, the one whose mistakes were always forgiven because she was just emotional. Todd was the charming man she married, the one everyone assumed was successful because he dressed like success and spoke like the world was his stage. And me? I was the backstage crew, the person who made sure the lights stayed on. At first, it started small. "Anita, can you cover this one thing? We're short this month." "Anita, it's an emergency. We'll pay you back." "Anita, you wouldn't want your sister to be embarrassed, would you?" Then it grew. Rent payments, credit cards, car leases, medical bills that weren't medical, business opportunities that were really vacations with a professional-sounding label. And somewhere along the way, I began funneling money into their accounts so regularly that it became invisible like air, like they forgot it wasn't theirs. I even invented a story to protect them and protect myself from the ugliness of the truth. I called it a family trust fund. I framed it as investment returns. I used language that sounded respectable, so no one would ask questions and Gloria wouldn't feel ashamed. But the shame never belonged to her, it belonged to me. Because deep down, I wasn't paying for their survival. I was paying for a fantasy, that if I gave enough, they would finally love me the way I kept craving. And the ring proved what 10 years of denial couldn't hide anymore. They didn't love me. They loved what I provided. I sat in my car with the ocean below and the broken ring beside me, and in that stillness, my grief finally sharpened into clarity. I wasn't just heartbroken about what Gloria had done. I was heartbroken about what I had allowed, about how many times I had mistaken tolerance for virtue, about how often I had swallowed pain and called it being the bigger person. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder, a notification from my bank app, an automatic transfer scheduled for the next morning. Rent payment, the same payment that had covered their villa for years. The same payment that allowed Gloria to host a party in a house she didn't truly pay for, in a life she didn't truly build. I stared at the notification until the screen dimmed. Then I picked up the broken platinum band and held it carefully, like it was still sacred. The jagged edge caught the light for a second, and I thought about Mrs. Harrison's voice, how calm she had been when she spoke about cruelty and survival. Survival is a kind of victory. I breathed in slowly. Salt air filled my lungs. My heartbeat steadied. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for an apology. I wasn't going to sit through another conversation where Gloria twisted reality and Todd pretended superiority. I was going to do the only thing that ever truly teaches people like them. I was going to let consequences arrive. I started the car again and drove home. Not into loneliness, but into a quiet sanctuary where I could finally make a decision that didn't revolve around being useful to someone else. When I stepped into my apartment and placed the broken ring on my desk, it looked like evidence laid out for a trial. And in a way, it was. Because that night wasn't just the end of a party, it was the end of my silence. And as I washed the dried blood from my palm, watching it swirl down the drain, I realized something that felt both terrifying and freeing. The person I had been for 10 years, the automatic fixer, the silent provider, the woman who kept the peace by swallowing herself, was gone. And the version of me that remained? She was finally ready to protect what mattered. Even if what mattered was me. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the version of me that had kept everything running for them was already gone. There was no dramatic announcement, no emotional speech, just quiet, deliberate action. I stood in front of my desk, the broken ring laid out on a sheet of dark velvet like a piece of evidence. The black sapphire fragments caught the morning light in dull, fractured reflections, and the twisted platinum band looked like something that had survived a war, and in a way, it had. I picked it up carefully, feeling the faint roughness where the metal had been forced apart, and slipped it into a small protective pouch. My hand had stopped bleeding, but the thin cut across my palm still stung just enough to remind me of what had happened. Not just what Gloria had done. What I had allowed. I didn't sit with that feeling for long. If I had learned anything from Mrs. Harrison, it was this. Reflection has value, but action changes outcomes. So I grabbed my coat, my bag, and the pouch with the ring, and left the apartment before the city fully woke up. The antique restoration shop stood on a quiet street lined with old buildings that had somehow resisted modernization. It opened early, and when I arrived, the heavy iron gate was still locked, the glass windows reflecting a pale sky that hadn't decided whether it wanted to be bright yet. I waited. There was something grounding about standing there in silence, knowing exactly why I was here. No second guessing. No internal debate. Just clarity. When the gate finally lifted with a metallic groan, Mr. Henderson stepped out from the back, adjusting his glasses. He paused when he saw me, clearly surprised. "Anita?" he said. "You're early." "I didn't want to wait," I replied, my voice calm. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded and gestured for me to come inside. The shop smelled the same as always: polished wood, aged paper, and something faintly metallic, like time itself had a scent. Velvet-lined counters displayed carefully restored pieces, each one carrying a story of damage and recovery. I placed the pouch on the counter and opened it slowly. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to focused seriousness as he put on his magnifying loupe. He didn't speak at first. He just examined the pieces, turning them gently, studying the fractures, the stress points, the way the sapphire had splintered. The silence stretched. I could see it in his face before he said anything. This wasn't normal damage. Finally, he removed the loupe and exhaled quietly. "This wasn't accidental," he said, his tone measured but firm. "Platinum doesn't fail like this under normal conditions. This was forced." I nodded once. "I know." He glanced at me again, perhaps expecting more explanation. I didn't give it. Not because I was hiding anything, but because the details didn't matter anymore. The outcome did. "Can it be repaired?" I asked. Mr. Henderson hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of precision. He picked up the band again, running his finger lightly along the warped edge. "It can," he said slowly, "but not easily. This is museum-grade work. The structure needs to be rebuilt, not just reshaped." "And the sapphire?" He paused, lifting one of the fragments toward the light. "We'll need to source a period-correct match to stabilize the fracture. That alone will take time and connections." I didn't interrupt. I let him explain every detail, because I wanted it documented, clear, undeniable. He moved behind the counter, pulled out a folder, and began writing. I watched his pen move steadily across the page, each line adding weight to what had already been decided in my mind. When he finished, he turned the paper toward me. The number sat at the bottom of the page like a final verdict. 45,000,000. For a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single line. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because I knew exactly what it represented. Not just the cost of repair, The cost of consequences. Would you like me to break it down further? Mr. Henderson asked gently. Yes, I said. Itemize everything, every step, every material, every specialist involved. He raised an eyebrow slightly, then nodded. Of course. I'll also need a formal invoice, I added. Stamped. That was the moment he understood. Not everything, but enough. His expression shifted, not to curiosity, but to quiet respect. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply did what professionals do when they recognize a situation that requires precision rather than emotion. I'll have it ready within the hour, he said. I spent that hour walking through the shop, not really seeing the items around me, but feeling the shift inside my chest. The heaviness from the night before had changed into something sharper, more controlled. Not anger. Direction. When Mr. Henderson handed me the final invoice, clean, stamped, official, I took it with a steady hand. Thank you, I said. He inclined his head slightly. We'll take care of it. I know, I replied. And I did. I left the shop and drove home without turning on the radio, without checking my phone, without letting any outside noise interfere with what I needed to do next. Because the repair wasn't the real beginning. This was... Back in my apartment, I walked straight into my study and placed the invoice on my desk. The room was quiet, exactly the way I liked it. Controlled, predictable, mine. I sat down in front of my workstation and powered it on. For a second, the screen reflected my face, calm, composed, unrecognizable, compared to the version of me that had stood in Gloria's villa the night before. Then the system loaded, and I opened the folder I had named years ago with a half-joking sense of irony. Ghost Ledger. The name felt different now. It wasn't a joke. It was a record of everything invisible that had kept Gloria and Todd afloat. Rows and rows of numbers filled the screen as I scrolled dates, amounts, notes, rent payments, credit card bailouts, car leases, emergency transfers that had come with frantic calls and dramatic stories. Thousands of entries. 10 years of quiet support. 10 years of me telling myself I was helping. I paused on one section: Todd's expenses. Country club memberships, premium liquor tabs, travel expenses disguised as business development. The pattern was clear. He hadn't been surviving. He had been performing. And I had been funding the performance. A slow breath left my lungs. For years, I had told myself I was protecting the family image, that I was preserving dignity by hiding their financial instability, that it was easier to manage things quietly than to force uncomfortable truths into the open. But looking at the ledger now, there was no dignity in it. Only avoidance. I moved my cursor to the banking portal tab and logged in. The interface was clean, familiar, built for efficiency. Automatic transfers scheduled with precision. Systems designed to run without interruption. Exactly like I had been. My eyes landed on the recurring payments scheduled for the end of the week. Seaside villa rent. The same villa where Gloria had humiliated me. The same villa where Todd had laughed. The same villa that existed because I had allowed it to. My finger hovered over the command. For a brief moment, an old instinct tried to surface the voice that whispered, maybe wait, maybe talk first. Maybe give them a chance to apologize. I silenced it. Because I already knew the truth. They wouldn't apologize. They would justify. They would minimize. They would expect. And I was done meeting expectations that required me to disappear. I clicked. A small notification appeared on the screen. Recurring payment canceled. No sound. No drama. Just finality. I didn't stop there. I moved to the credit management section and opened the list of supplementary cards issued under my account. Gloria's name. Todd's name. Each card representing access, freedom, illusion. I suspended them one by one. The system processed the changes instantly. Available credit. 0. I leaned back slightly in my chair, watching the screen settle into its new state. For the first time in years, there was no outgoing flow tied to their names. No invisible support. No silent safety net. Just stillness. But I wasn't finished. I opened a new document and began drafting a formal letter. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. Property damage, professional assessment, required reimbursement. I attached the invoice from Mr. Henderson, making sure every detail was clear, every figure undeniable. When I finished, I read it once, then twice, ensuring the tone was exactly what it needed to be. Unarguable. I printed the documents, the paper thick and crisp, and placed them into a rigid envelope. Then I sealed it. Not as a sister, as a creditor. As I wrote their names on the front, my hand didn't tremble. Because this wasn't revenge. This was correction. I stood there for a moment, the envelope in my hand, feeling the weight of what I had just set in motion. Gloria would laugh when she opened it. Todd would dismiss it. They would both think it was a bluff. And that was fine. Because the letter was never meant to scare them. It was meant to mark the beginning of a reality they had never been forced to face. And this time, I wasn't going to step in and soften the fall. 2 days after I sent the letter, everything began to unravel quietly at first. Then, all at once, like a structure that had been hollow for years, finally collapsing under its own weight. I didn't need to be there to see it. I knew exactly how it would start. Gloria would be in the villa, probably stretched across that velvet sofa she loved, flipping through a fashion magazine and circling things she never truly paid for. She would open the envelope casually, expecting something glamorous, an invitation, a luxury sample, something that matched the life she believed she deserved. Instead, she found my letter. I imagined her eyes scanning the first lines with mild confusion, her expression tightening as the language turned formal, unfamiliar, uncomfortable. And then she would reach the bottom of the page, the number printed clean and undeniable. $450,000. And then she would laugh. Not because it was funny, but because denial is easier than fear. That same afternoon, my phone rang once. I didn't answer. It rang again, then stopped. A voicemail followed, exactly as expected. Her voice came through sharp, dripping with contempt, but underneath it there was something slightly off, like a crack she didn't want to acknowledge. "Are you serious right now, Anita? Have you completely lost your mind? $500,000 for that scrap metal? This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If this is your idea of a joke, it's not funny. I'm not paying a single cent for this nonsense." I let the message play to the end. Then I deleted it. No reply. No reaction. Because the letter was only one part of what I had set in motion. The rest, they were about to discover on their own. Across the city, Todd was finishing up something far more ordinary, filling his oversized pickup truck at a busy gas station. I could picture him clearly, leaning casually against the side of the vehicle, tapping his fingers on the metal, completely unaware that the ground beneath his life had already shifted. He would have whistled. He always did when he felt comfortable, like everything around him was working exactly the way it should. He pumped the gas, watched the numbers climb, then grabbed his wallet and pulled out one of the premium cards I had been paying for every month without fail. He swiped it. And instead of the usual approval beep, the screen flashed red. Declined. At first, he would frown, not worried, just annoyed. Machines fail, systems glitch. He would swipe again, a little harder this time, as if pressure could force the result he expected. Declined. By the third attempt, the line of cars behind him would start to grow. Horns would sound. People would glance over with impatience. And Todd, who had spent years performing confidence, would begin to feel something unfamiliar creep into his chest. Uncertainty. He would pull out another card. Declined. And another. Declined. Each rejection louder than the last, even without sound. By the time the station attendant started walking toward him with a cautious look, Todd would already be retreating, climbing back into the truck, slamming the door, dialing Gloria with hands that were no longer steady. When she answered, she was probably still smiling from her earlier rant, still convinced she had put me in my place. That smile wouldn't last. "What do you mean all the cards are dead?" she would snap, irritation rising. "Try again." "I did," Todd would say, his voice tight now. "Every single one. They're all locked." Silence. Then the shift. Because Gloria, for all her arrogance, understood one thing very clearly. Money was control. And control was slipping. They would open their banking app together, her on the couch, him in the truck, and watch the screen load with a delay that suddenly felt too long. Then, the numbers would appear. Not low, not reduced. 0. A clean, empty balance where there had always been a cushion. For a few seconds, neither of them would speak. Not because they understood fully, but because their minds were trying to reject what they were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to them. And instead of arriving at accountability, they would arrive at anger. Because that was easier. She's overreacting, Gloria would say, her voice sharpening. This is just a tantrum. She'll turn it back on. Todd would latch onto that immediately, because the alternative that the system had changed permanently was too terrifying to accept. Yeah, he would mutter. She always does. But this time, I didn't. A week passed. No calls from me, no messages, no explanation. And that silence did something my words never could. It forced reality to fill the space. The rent didn't get paid. For the first time in 5 years, the landlord noticed. The knock on the villa door wasn't polite. It was sharp, insistent, the kind that carries authority. Gloria opened it with her usual composed expression, ready to deflect, to charm, to smooth things over the way she always had. But charm doesn't work on numbers. The landlord stood there with a document in hand and a face that had no interest in excuses. Your payment is overdue, he said flatly. If the full amount isn't received within 48 hours, I'll begin eviction proceedings. Gloria tried to smile, to offer something vague about a banking issue, a temporary delay, but the man didn't engage. He handed her the notice and left. For the first time, the villa didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a deadline. Todd tried to fix it the only way he knew how, by calling people. Old contacts, drinking buddies, former colleagues, anyone who might still believe the version of him he had been performing for years. But reputations built on illusion don't hold under pressure. Call after call ended in rejection. Excuses, delays, polite refusals. No one was willing to lend him anything, because deep down, they all knew. He had never been the man he claimed to be. The next blow came louder. A tow truck, the sound of it reversing into the driveway, the mechanical beeping cutting through the afternoon like a warning siren. Todd stepped outside just in time to see the driver attaching chains to his beloved truck. "What are you doing?" he shouted, panic breaking through. The driver didn't look up. Repossession order. Financing's been revoked. Primary cosigner pulled out. Todd's face drained of color. He ran forward, slippers slapping against the pavement, trying to argue, to stop it, but there was nothing to argue against. The paperwork was clear. The decision had already been made. The truck lifted slowly off the ground, heavy and undeniable. Todd turned toward Gloria, who stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mixture of shock and rising fury. "You said she was bluffing," he yelled. "You said she'd fix this." Gloria didn't answer. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure. And that uncertainty, that crack in her certainty, was the beginning of everything falling apart. The comfortable life she had worn like a crown was being stripped away piece by piece. Not with drama, not with revenge, with absence, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the time they found my address, the storm had already started to gather over the city. It was one of those heavy California afternoons where the sky turns an unnatural shade, dark, bruised, almost purple, and the air feels like it's holding something back. I had just finished reviewing a client file in my study when the concierge called upstairs. "Miss Anita," he said politely, "you have 2 visitors requesting access. They say it's urgent, Gloria and Todd." I didn't respond right away. I walked to the window instead, looking out over the harbor where the wind had begun to rough up the water. For a moment, I considered refusing. It would have been easy, clean, final. But something in me, the part that had spent years in silence, wanted this moment to be seen clearly. "Send them up," I said. The private elevator ride to my floor usually felt effortless, quiet, controlled. But I imagined what it must feel like from the inside for them now, every second stretching longer, every number lighting up like a countdown they couldn't stop. When the doors slid open into my foyer, I was already standing there, waiting. The first thing I noticed wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't. Gloria didn't greet me with her usual performative warmth. Todd didn't try to joke his way into comfort. They both just stood there, frozen, scanning the space like their eyes were trying to rewrite what they were seeing, because the reality in front of them didn't match the story they had told themselves for years. My home didn't look like struggle. It looked like intention. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the storm rolling over the water. The furniture was minimal, but precise. Italian, custom, chosen, not shown off. The library wall stretched across the living room, filled with rare editions and preserved manuscripts, each one worth more than the image they had built their lives on. Gloria stepped forward first, her heels echoing too loudly against the hardwood floor. "This," she started, her voice thin, almost disoriented. "What is this?" I didn't answer immediately. I let her look, let her absorb it, let the silence do what explanations never could. Todd followed a few steps behind her, his eyes moving quickly, calculating, comparing, trying to understand how the woman he had dismissed for years was standing in a place he couldn't afford to imagine. Then, just like before, Gloria's confusion twisted into something sharper. "You lied," she snapped suddenly, turning toward me. "All this time you hid this. From me. From us." There it was. Not curiosity. Not reflection. Accusation. I leaned lightly against the edge of the table. Calm. "I didn't hide anything," I said. "You never asked." "That's not the point," she shot back, her voice rising as she moved further into the room, touching things without permission, like she was trying to claim them through proximity. "If you had this kind of money, why was I struggling? Why didn't you help more?" I almost smiled at that. More. Todd stepped in quickly, sensing the tension, his tone shifting into something softer, more strategic. "Look," he said, rubbing his hands together. "We all said things we didn't mean. Let's not make this bigger than it is. Just turn everything back on. We'll fix it." Fix it. Like this was a switch. Like nothing had changed. I didn't respond with words. Instead, I walked to the coffee table and placed the leather-bound binder down with a solid, deliberate thud. The sound cut through the room like a line being drawn. Gloria's eyes flicked down to it, suspicious. Todd's expression tightened, something instinctive warning him that this wasn't going to go the way he expected. I opened the binder slowly and turned it toward them. "Take a look," I said. At first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. Rows of numbers, dates, transfers, clean, organized, undeniable. Then Gloria leaned closer, and I watched the moment recognition hit. Her eyes moved faster. Her breathing changed. Todd stepped beside her, his confidence slipping as he scanned the summary page. At the top, highlighted clearly, was the total. $1. 2 million. 10 years. Every rent payment. Every credit card bill. Every car lease. Every silent rescue. Gloria's lips parted slightly. This isn't real." "It is," I said quietly. "Every number. Every date." Todd shook his head. But it wasn't denial, it was realization trying to find a way out. Why would you keep track of this?" "Because someone had to know the truth," I replied. Gloria straightened, her shock quickly hardening into anger, because anger was the only way she knew how to defend herself. "You're trying to make us look like parasites," she snapped. "Like we couldn't survive without you." I held her gaze steadily. "You couldn't." Silence fell, heavy and sharp. Todd looked down again, this time slower, as if hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. Gloria's voice came out tighter now, strained. "So what? You helped your family. That's what people do." "Yes," I said. "They help. They don't fund disrespect." That landed. I reached into the folder beside the binder and pulled out the invoice from Mr. Henderson, placing it on the glass table between us. Gloria's eyes dropped to it automatically. She skimmed the header, then the details, then the final line. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed too loudly in the room. $450,000, she said, shaking her head. "For that ring? You've completely lost your mind." Todd didn't laugh. He was staring at the number like it meant something more than money. Because to him, it did. It meant consequence. I stepped closer, my voice calm, controlled, and impossible to misunderstand. "The invoice," I said, "is the cost of the ring." I let that sit for a second. Then I added, "But cutting off the support, that's the cost of how you treated me." Gloria's expression shifted, the anger cracking just enough to reveal something underneath. Fear. She tried to push past it. "You're being dramatic. You'll turn everything back on. You always do." I shook my head once. "No," I said. The simplicity of that word did more than any argument ever could. Todd exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping, the last of his confidence draining away as reality settled in. Gloria, on the other hand, took a step forward, her hand lifting slightly as if she might grab something, the binder, control. "Don't do this," she said, her voice no longer sharp but strained. "We're family." That word used to mean everything to me. Now it felt like a label they only remembered when they needed something. "I was family," I said quietly. "When I was paying." That was the moment she went still. Not because she agreed. Because she couldn't argue with it. I straightened and pointed toward the elevator. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "Then I call security." Todd didn't hesitate. He grabbed Gloria's arm, pulling her back before she could react, his instincts finally aligned with reality. "Let's go," he muttered. Gloria didn't move at first. Her eyes stayed locked on me, filled with something that used to intimidate me: anger, pride, entitlement. Now it just looked empty. Eventually, she turned. They stepped into the elevator together, the doors sliding shut with a quiet finality that echoed through the room long after they were gone. I stood there for a while, not moving, not thinking, just letting the silence settle. 3 days later, the final piece fell into place. An official eviction order. Immediate removal. No extensions. And for the first time since that night at the party, there was nothing left for them to stand on. 3 weeks later, the city felt different, not because anything around me had changed, but because I had. The silence in my apartment no longer echoed. It settled. It held. It felt like a space that finally belonged to me, not a waiting room for other people's chaos. The money that used to disappear quietly into Gloria and Todd's lives now stayed where it was meant to be. And with it came something I hadn't realized I'd been missing all along: control over my own future. I had started small, expanding my archive, upgrading the climate-controlled room where I stored rare manuscripts, taking on higher-profile clients without second-guessing my worth. Each decision felt deliberate, grounded, and most importantly, mine. The ring was still with Mr. Henderson during that time. Part of me avoided thinking about it too much, as if hoping too hard would somehow make the damage irreversible. But then, one morning, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was him. His voice carried a note I hadn't heard before, something close to excitement. "Anita," he said, "you might want to come by today. We've finished the restoration." For a moment, I just stood there, letting the words settle. Finished. I drove to the shop that afternoon with a quiet tension in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation wrapped in caution. I had seen broken things restored before, but this was different. This wasn't just an artifact. This was something personal. Something that had been tied to a version of me I was no longer willing to return to. When I walked into the shop, Mr. Henderson greeted me with a small, knowing smile. He didn't say much. He simply placed a familiar velvet box on the counter and gestured for me to open it. I took a slow breath and lifted the lid. For a second, I didn't move. The black sapphire sat there, whole again, its surface catching the light in a way that felt deeper than before. The platinum band had been reinforced, its structure stronger, more deliberate. It didn't look exactly the same, and that was the point. "There's a fusion line here," Mr. Henderson said gently, pointing to a nearly invisible seam along the metal. "It's permanent. We could polish it further. But I thought, you might want it left as is." I ran my finger lightly over the surface. He was right. The scar wasn't something to hide. It was proof. I slipped the ring back onto my finger, and for the first time since that night, something in me settled completely. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't the same person who had lost it. "Thank you," I said quietly. Mr. Henderson inclined his head. "Some pieces," he replied, "come back stronger." I understood what he meant. When I left the shop, the sunlight caught the sapphire, sending a soft reflection across my hand. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was there, steady, unbreakable in a way that mattered. Life moved forward. And then, one afternoon, without warning, the past crossed my path again. I was driving downtown to meet a potential client. The traffic light ahead turned red, and I slowed to a stop beside a small, unremarkable diner I had passed countless times without ever noticing. Until that moment, through the large glass window, I saw her. At first, my mind didn't register it. The image didn't fit the version of Gloria I had known for so long. The woman inside wore a faded uniform, her hair pulled back loosely, her posture slightly hunched as she wiped down a table with slow, tired movements. Then, she turned her head. And I recognized her. Gloria. But not the Gloria from the villa. Not the woman who had laughed while crushing something that mattered to me. Not the person who had built her identity on appearance and control. This Gloria looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. As if the weight of reality had pressed down on her, reshaping everything she used to project outward. There were no designer clothes, no sharp heels, no effortless confidence, just exhaustion. She moved from one table to another, her motions mechanical, her attention focused on tasks that didn't require thinking too far ahead. It was a life reduced to the immediate, to what needed to be cleaned, served, completed. For a moment, I just watched. Not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, just awareness, because this was the natural conclusion of everything that had happened. No intervention, no rescue, no more cushioning. Gloria paused, as if sensing something, and slowly lifted her head. Our eyes met through the glass. And in that instant, everything unspoken passed between us. Recognition, memory, understanding. Her face went pale. Not dramatically, not like a performance. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the color draining as reality caught up with her in a way no argument ever had. Her gaze flickered to my hand, to the ring, to the faint line in the metal that marked where it had once been broken, then back to my face. I didn't move. I didn't gesture. I didn't roll down the window. I just sat there, and for the first time, I saw something in Gloria that had never been there before. Not anger, not entitlement. Shame. It passed quickly, like she wasn't used to holding it. Her eyes dropped, her shoulders tightening slightly as she turned back to the table in front of her, resuming her work as if that small act of normalcy could shield her from what she had just felt. She didn't come outside. She didn't call my name. She didn't ask for anything. Because now, she understood. That bridge was gone. The light turned green. The car behind me honked softly, bringing me back to the present. I shifted into gear and drove forward, the city unfolding ahead of me in familiar lines and patterns. In the rearview mirror, the diner grew smaller, then disappeared completely. And with it, so did the last thread that had tied me to the person I used to be. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won. What I felt was lighter, clearer, free. Because revenge, in the way most people imagine it, is loud. It demands attention. It feeds on reaction. But this was something else. This was quiet. This was choosing not to return. This was understanding that the greatest shift doesn't happen when someone else falls. It happens when you stop needing them to stand at all. As I continued driving, the sunlight caught the sapphire again, a brief flash of dark brilliance against my skin. And this time, when I looked at it, I didn't see what had been broken. I saw what had survived. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Stories like this are never really about a ring, or even about revenge. They're about that quiet moment when you finally realize the difference between love and self-sacrifice, and how easily one can become the other without you noticing. For years, I believed that giving more would fix what was broken between us. That if I carried enough weight, my family would eventually meet me halfway. But the truth is, some people don't change. When you protect them, they become more comfortable hurting you. What made this story powerful isn't Gloria's downfall. It's the moment I chose to stop being the person who allowed it. The moment I understood that walking away isn't weakness, it's self-respect. And maybe that's the question this story leaves you with. How much of yourself are you giving away just to keep the peace? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever struggled with setting boundaries or choosing yourself over toxic relationships, then you're not alone, and this channel is for you. Subscribe to Revenge Truth Vault for more stories that dive deep into human emotions, betrayal, growth, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life.